of art. And I just like this idea of making invisible visible.
Sometimes you can have really serious portraits, but you've got such a great laugh. I feel like I want to capture some of the candid nature of your personality.
Opera House can and must be many things. It shouldn't cater just to one audience, and it shouldn't be focused on just one corner of the repertoire. It must do everything and be open to the interests of many different people.
Inspiring arts and culture on BBC News.
I'm Caitriona in Milwaukee.
And I'm Sumi Somaskanda in Washington, and this is BBC World News America. Wagner boss Yevgeny Prigozhin is listed as a passenger on a plane that has crashed. The fate of the man who threatened Russian President Vladimir Putin's regime is now uncertain.
And Republican candidates for president face off in their first debate, while former US President Donald Trump launches a counter-option online. Just what can we expect from Milwaukee?
Welcome to World News America. We will get to Caitriona in Milwaukee in just a few minutes, but we begin tonight in Russia, where the country's civil aviation authorities reporting the boss of the Wagner mercenary group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, was on the passenger list of a jet that crashed north of Moscow. The authority also said Wagner's co-founder Dmitry Utkin was on board. Some social media accounts linked to the Wagner Group are confirming these reports, but the BBC has not independently verified this information or whether Prigozhin was on the plane. Quoting emergency services, Russian state media confirmed a short while ago that the bodies of all 10 passengers were recovered from the crash site and search operations are complete. The Russian Emergencies Ministry said the aircraft, which was flying from Moscow to St. Petersburg, came down in the Tver region and that 10 people, including 3 crew members, were on board. The statement says everyone was killed. Now, using data from the flight tracking site Flight Radar 24, the jet appeared near Moscow, where it climbed to an altitude of nearly 29,000 feet. That's 8,800 meters, before suddenly dropping dramatically. Prigozhin had kept a low profile since his short-lived mutiny in June, although a video released a few days ago suggested that he was in an African country. A Russian investigative committee spokesperson said shortly after the reports that it has opened a criminal case into the crash. And let's go right now to our correspondent. Vitaly Shevchenko is from BBC Monitoring joining us now. Vitaly, it's good to see you. What is the latest that you are seeing on this story?
Well, what we've got from various Wagner-linked channels on social media is the closest we have to a confirmation that Yevgeny Prigozhin was indeed on board that plane that crashed outside Moscow earlier today. What we don't have is any official confirmation from security and rescue officials who worked at the crash site. The Civil Aviation Authority of Russia has published a full list of people on board the plane. Yevgeny Prigozhin's name is there, as is the name of his closest deputy commander, his right hand, Dmitry Utkin, Mr. Wagner himself. That was his call sign, Wagner. So his name was on the list of people registered as traveling on board the plane. If they were physically there, that's not confirmed yet, but there's a increasing amount of reports coming from various reasonably credible social media accounts, websites, public figures in Russia, quoting various sources as saying that Yevgeny Prigozhin is indeed dead. So everybody is waiting for any confirmation from officials.
Vitaly, this has been such a fast developing story, but tell us why this news, if confirmed, is so significant.
Well, Yevgeny Prigozhin has played a key role in several Kremlin projects. One of them is, of course, the war against Ukraine. Evgeny Prigozhin's Wagner mercenaries have shown themselves as a very capable fighting force, in particular outside the eastern town of Bakhmut, which they managed to capture after several months of fighting. Before that, Evgeny Prigozhin was linked to so-called troll factories, i.e. fake social media accounts spreading pro-Kremlin narratives, trying to influence the political systems in various countries, such as the United States. But after Evgeny Prigozhin's short-lived and failed mutiny back in June, a lot of people began to think that he has crossed some really important red lines and rebelling against Russia's top military commanders, and coming very close to challenging Vladimir Putin himself is not something that the Kremlin will forgive. And several commentators said that basically Evgeny Prigozhin was a dead man walking. So if he's indeed been killed in this crash, that would come as no surprise to them.
Vitaly Shevchenko from BBC Monitoring. Thank you so much for that update, Vitaly. Good to speak with you. Earlier on Wednesday, U.S. President Biden was asked about reports of the crash.
I don't know for a fact what happened, but I'm not surprised. There's not much that happens when Russia is not behind, but I don't know enough to know the answer.
All right, for more on this story, we can speak now to freelance journalist John Lechner. He is writing a book on the Wagner Group. John, good to have you back on BBC News. First of all, what do we know about Yevgeny Prigozhin's movements today, up until we saw this news breaking?
Sure. Thanks for having me again. I've confirmed with some sources within Wagner who were close to Prigozhin that it does indeed seem that he was in Africa at least a couple of days ago, most likely in Mali, where we saw a video produced on one of his Telegram channels. I've heard that he then arrived back in Russia earlier this morning, and the sources that I have within the organization have said basically with 95% certainty that he and Dmitry Utkin have indeed been killed.
Wow. Okay. And can you remind us, John, what he had been doing up until this point, ever since that failed mutiny that we saw in June?
Sure. Well, I think there's been so much movement and a lot of obscurity about what exactly has been going on. But essentially, Wagner had been seen moving its main headquarters from Malkino in Russia to Belarus, while at the same time we saw Yevgeny Prigozhin still be relatively active within the African theaters in which Wagner operates, certainly producing commentary, not necessarily all the time appearing on video, but we did see an appearance at the Russia-Africa Summit. We did see that he was at least moving back and forth somewhat between Belarus and Russia, and then appearing in a video in Mali most recently.
John, of course, Yevgeny Prigozhin would have been aware that crossing Vladimir Putin was considered an act of betrayal. Was he expressing concern about his own security? Do we know how he saw his own fate going forward?
You know, I wish I knew the answer to that question. I think, ultimately, my best guess is that the events around June 24th, when he launched the mutiny, were events that really got out of his control. I think he was in a situation that, in his own mind, was desperate enough that it required some very ostentatious actions to get the ear and access to Putin again. It seemed after the mutiny that he was doing perhaps the best that he could to make things appear as business as usual. Whether or not there was anxiety under the surface with someone like that, I'm sure he would never admit it himself as well, but it's certainly difficult to tell.
John, talk to us about the wider implications here for the Wagner Group itself. We know fighters are still, of course, in Africa and in Ukraine. What would this mean, if confirmed, for their movements?
Well, I think, it's still too early to tell. The structure of Wagner and its relationship to the state has always been fluid and context dependent, especially on the theater of operations. And so our going assumption previously was that we were going to actually see much more continuity than any type of change, especially in Africa, because Wagner ultimately is a product of the Russian state's lack of capacity and willingness to project formal military force in the region. How exactly this will play out between Wagner, its top commanders, and the Russian Ministry of Defense, I think is still something to be seen. I don't think a lot of the Wagner commanders necessarily see a promising future subordinate to the Ministry of Defense. So ultimately, a lot of this will probably come down to individual decisions.
How big is this conflict, John, between the security forces with the Wagner Group and Russia's defense?
Well, I think it's difficult when we talk about how many people are within Wagner, because Wagner is ultimately a network of individuals. So, for the most part, it's contractors, people who sign on to a fixed contract and they fight with Wagner in a particular theater. And when that contract is over, they're no longer with the organization. And so the number of fighters that Wagner has under its employ can vary considerably, up to, thousands and maybe up to 50,000 at one point in Ukraine, but it's certainly much less now and probably closer to the 10,000 range. That's obviously a very small number compared to, the Russian military itself. But nonetheless, some of Wagner's top commanders represent some of the greater military talent that Russia has to bear. And so it'll be interesting to see where these guys end up and in what type of structure.
Exactly. Implications would be, of course, very significant here if this news is confirmed. John Lechner, thank you so much for joining us on BBC News.
Thank you for having me.
And this is a developing story. We'll keep track of the latest details for you. You can follow our live page on bbc.com for updates as well. But let's go to Caitriona Perry now in Milwaukee, where several of the Republican candidates for president will take the stage tonight.
That's right, Sumi. You're very welcome here to Milwaukee. There's somewhat of a conservative festival atmosphere. You can probably hear a rock band behind me, and there are grilled meats here as well. As Milwaukee, the stage is set for 8 candidates to have their chance to become the 2024 Republican presidential nominee. Of course, one person is missing, the former President Donald Trump, choosing not to be here. He has said that he would not be doing any of the debates and has instead opted for a pre-recorded interview with the former Fox News host Tucker Carlson. That interview will air at the same time as the debate on Wednesday. Now, one of the candidates, North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, suffered a high-grade tear of his Achilles tendon on Tuesday while playing a game of pickup basketball with his staff. He arrived at the venue on crutches a little while ago. Well, joining me now to discuss these developments is our North America correspondent, Anthony Zerker. Anthony, if we can start with the North Dakota Governor first, Doug Burgum. What's his status? He's here, but is he going to take part tonight?
He's here, and he did the walkthrough, as you noted, on crutches today. So it appears he is going to be participating in the debate. There will be 8 people on the stage. There's one, Donald Trump, who was offered a spot and is declining. There are others like Larry Elder, who really wanted to be on and is filing a complaint, apparently, with the FEC. But Doug Burgum got on the stage, and he's going to be there if he can.
So whether it's 7 or 8, what tonight? The stakes are pretty high for those.
Yeah, obviously this is make a first impression on the debate stage for all of these Republicans. A lot of pressure on Ron DeSantis because he was viewed as a consensus next guy behind Donald Trump for much of this year, but has been falling back to the pack recently. So I think that is going to be an interesting thing to watch. I think obviously Donald Trump will cast a shadow over the debate stage. Everyone is going to have to talk about him one way or the other. There will be some friction between people like former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, who is going to be critical of him, and maybe Vivek Ramaswamy, who's been very protective of Donald Trump. And then Ukraine will come up because of what happened with the plane crash today. And also it is a source of conflict among Republicans. You will have individuals on the stage who have been critical of continued U.S. support for Ukraine, and then others like former Vice President Mike Pence, who sees this as a defining battle that the United States has to stand by Ukraine, to stand up to Russian aggression.
With the former president, though, so far ahead in any poll that you look at, Is it a done deal that he'll be the nominee? Is there in fact any point to all of this?
Well, it's a big hill for any of these candidates to climb. When someone has as big a lead as Donald Trump has right now, historically they are in a dominating position, and something really dramatic has to happen to shake up that. But this is a battle to see who could be that second person, and it is still about half a year till voting starts, and we don't know what can happen between now and then. There could be something dramatic. It wouldn't be the first time in American politics where we have been caught entirely off guard and the surprise has turned the race on its head.
And of course, if Donald Trump is the nominee, there's going to be a gap there for a name for his vice president.
That's true, and actually Donald Trump's Political Action Committee has created a website that has all of the candidates on the stage, and they're in little cartoon cutouts, and they're billing this as the vice presidential debate and asking people who visit the site to vote on which one of the candidates should be his running mate. Vivek Ramaswamy is the one who's leading that poll right now.
And speaking of the former president, he's not here, but he has recorded an interview with Tucker Carlson that'll go out at more or less the same time. What can we expect from that?
Well, Donald Trump has posted on his social media site that he's doing this, that it's going to air tonight, and he said sparks will fly. So, you know, they've had their issues in the past. Tucker Carlson, if you recall, there were leaked emails and text messages where he was highly critical of Donald Trump, saying that his presidency was a disaster and that he would be happy to see him exit the stage. So there may not be a perfectly collegial atmosphere between the two of them, but they both obviously have bones to pick with Fox News, the conservative television network that is hosting this site. Tucker Carlson being fired by Fox News, and Donald Trump accusing Fox News of being biased against him and too supportive of Ron DeSantis. So their agendas align tonight, and they're going to try to draw some attention away from this debate.
And of course, not all Republican voters are fans of Donald Trump, and they will be watching this debate to see who they may cast their vote for in the primary season.
Yeah, if you look at the polls, Donald Trump has a majority of support among Republicans right now, but it is not a rock-solid majority. There are people, about half of Donald Trump's supporters in an Iowa poll recently showed that they were willing to entertain other candidates. So I think all of the people who are coming in here would like to think, at least, that they might be able to peel some of Donald Trump's supporters away. Now, the strategy for doing that, you do a Chris Christie or an Asa Hutchinson, the former Arkansas governor, and take him head on and be highly critical, or are you a Vivek Ramaswamy or one of the other candidates who tries to position themselves as someone just like Trump, but maybe a little different enough?
Okay, well, we have all of that ahead of us tonight. We'll keep an eye out for all of that. Anthony Zerker, thanks indeed for joining us. Well, a little earlier, I spoke with Jason Miller, a senior advisor on Donald Trump's campaign team, a member of his inner circle, about this debate and Donald Trump's absence. Jason Miller, senior advisor for former President Donald J. Trump for his campaign. Thanks for joining us this evening. I suppose the first question is, why is the former president skipping the debate here?
Yeah, well, President Trump is ahead by 50 points in the Republican primary. You look ahead to the general election. He's the only Republican candidate who's beating crooked Joe Biden. And so President Trump's ready to focus on Joe Biden and what we have to do to get this country back on track. President Trump has said that he's not going to be at this debate, and until further notice won't be at any of the debates. That's not unlike what Ronald Reagan did in his primary campaign years ago. But there's really no reason when you have one candidate like President Trump at 62% in the polls, and then you have candidates like Ada Hutchinson who are at 1% or less than 1% to go in there and throw pot shots. That's not going to talk how we're going to fix inflation and all the issues going on with our country. It's basically it's a clown car.
Okay, but nevertheless, Wisconsin is an important state in the election. The convention will be here. Is there a risk that he's offending Republican voters by not turning up to this?
No, not at all. I've had a number of local Republicans here from Milwaukee and from Wisconsin give me high fives and handshakes as we're entering the arena here, the outside of the arena. This definitely is Trump country. There's a reason why the president's ahead by so much, by so many points. In fact, nobody's going to, for example, Joe Biden and saying you need to debate RFK Jr. Sorry, a little bit of a heat wave here, and that's a little bit toasty. But President Trump is ahead by so far, it wouldn't even be a good show. Why would you put, if you're go say 17-0 in the regular season, why should you have to mess around with someone who's 0-17 and doesn't even register on the polls?
Some of the candidates here know him really well. Former Vice President Mike Pence, Nikki Haley, Chris Christie. What if they decide to attack him and he's not here to defend himself?
Well, I think the biggest challenge, President Trump can handle himself and he can definitely push back. But I think the challenge that a lot of these candidates have is what is it that actually gives them a value proposition for why they're running. You look at the entire field, nobody has said something that really distinguishes themselves or makes them step out from the rest of the pack, particularly on policy ideas. And to the extent that policy even comes up this evening, they're going to be talking as effectively an echo or a cheap imitation of President Trump.
Does that mean that you're not looking to any of these 8 people as possible VP candidates?
Well, I'd never take that off the table. That'd be the quickest way to become a former senior advisor for President Trump. There are several people that are on the stage tonight that we really like.
Any names?
I'm not going to necessarily throw out some names. I personally am a fan. I think Vivek Ramaswamy could probably have a pretty good night tonight. I think Senator Tim Scott is someone that we like. I think really the pressure, though, for tonight is on Ron DeSanctimonious, the number 2 candidate in the race. He's dropping like a rock with regard to his polls. He's not doing very well. He's on the 5th reboot of his campaign. He has a new spokesman that he just announced. So it's not going so well for Ron DeSantis. And so if he doesn't have a big night tonight, I think the cheers or the calls for him to drop out of the race are going to intensify.
Now, Donald Trump has recorded an interview with the former Fox News host Tucker Carlson that will air at the same time, starting 5 minutes beforehand. What can we expect from that?
I think you're going to have tens of millions more people watching President Trump's interview with Tucker Carlson than tuning in for all the other candidates to bind. I mean, the fact of the matter is President Trump is where the ratings are. He's where the action is. President Trump has already won tonight's Republican debate. He casts a shadow over
everything. Can you win something if you don't turn up, though?
He's already won. He's going to have tens of millions of more viewers. Whether it be the Fox News questioners or whether it be the other candidates, they're going to spend their entire time talking about President Trump. They want to be President Trump. They cannot be President Trump. President Trump can beat Joe Biden. The other ones can't. Last question then, Jason Miller. The president has recorded that interview. He's not here. Will he be watching on TV? Not sure. President hasn't exactly told us what he is going to be doing. He's in Bedminster, New Jersey. We'll see. I'll leave that up to him, but I know we'll be watching the interview that he does with Tucker Carlson, which again is going to get tens of millions of views. I think that's really what's going to drive the news tonight. Okay, Jason Miller, senior advisor with the Trump campaign. Thanks for joining us. Thank you so much. Turning to Georgia now, where more people accused of conspiring with former U.S. President Donald Trump to try and overturn his 2020 election defeat have turned themselves in. Former President Trump, meanwhile, says he will hand himself in to authorities on Thursday. The latest to surrender were Georgia Republican Party Chairman David Schaefer, as well as defendants Kathy Latham, former Coffee County Republican Party Chair Ray Smith, former Trump attorney in Georgia, as well as Kenneth Cheesebro, a Trump campaign attorney. Well, this comes one day after Scott Hall, a Georgia bail bondsman, and lawyer John Eastman turned themselves in. Notorious Trump attorney Sidney Powell also surrendered earlier on Wednesday. But another key figure, Rudy Giuliani, Donald Trump's personal lawyer, has also surrendered. He's accused of advancing false claims that the 2020 election was stolen. Along with Mr. Trump, the former New York City mayor faces the most charges of the 19 defendants. Speaking after his arrest, Giuliani criticized the Fulton County District Attorney, who's prosecuting him.
Fannie Willis will go down in American history as having conducted one of the worst attacks on the American Constitution ever when this case is dismissed. She has violated people's First Amendment right to advocate the government, to petition the government for grievances, like an election they believe was poorly conducted or falsely conducted. People have a right to believe that in America. Biden and the Biden state doesn't have a right to tell you what the truth is.
Well, joining us now from Atlanta, Georgia, is BBC State Department correspondent Barbara Plett-Usher. Barbara, Mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani surrendering himself today. What can you tell us about what happened?
Well, he had to pay a $150,000 bond, which is a lot of money. And in fact, he was seen just up the road here coming out of a bail bonds company. It's almost as much as Donald Trump will have to pay, $200,000. And he has the same number of charges as Mr. Trump, 13. So that just reflects the role he played. He was, of course, Mr. Trump's personal lawyer after the 2020 election, and he took the lead role in promoting these falsehoods about the election fraud and the charges that the election had been stolen, including here in Georgia quite actively. He has been charged under that racketeering law, which alleges that all 19 defendants were engaged in a conspiracy to subvert the results of the election. And with Mr. Giuliani, it's a bit of ironic because in one of his former lives as a federal prosecutor, he kind of made a name for himself with racketeering cases, and now he's being charged in one of them.
Barbara, what can we expect to happen tomorrow then when the former president is due to be there?
Well, he's going to be booked for a fourth time. He'll be fingerprinted. This time, there's probably going to be a mug shot. That's what we've been led to expect. That's what happened with the other defendants, and that would be the first time. He will have to pay also that $200,000 bond, and he has particular conditions attached to it. He is prohibited from any intimidation of co-defendants, witnesses, victims of the case, and including on social media. Now, in other times when he has surrendered himself, he has made a bit of a spectacle of it. I think we can expect that to probably happen here as well. He has already posted that he will proudly be arrested on Thursday afternoon.
Okay, Barbara, thank you for that. And thank you for joining us on World News America. I'm Caitriona Perry.
And I'm Sumi Somaskanda. Thank you for watching. Have a good night.
Hello there, let's take a look at what the weather has in store.